It was the sound that changed everything. The piercing ring of a 911 operator picking up the phone. A quiet, almost surreal moment that hung in the air as if time itself had decided to freeze. A man, breathless, trembling at the other end of the line, spoke the chilling words that would send shockwaves through the quiet town of Ridgewood. I just killed someone." The voice was shaky, high-pitched with a blend of panic and disbelief, as if he couldn't quite fathom the reality of his own actions. But what followed was even more unsettling. He didn't run. He didn't try to cover up the crime. He made the call. He sought help. "Tell me what happened." The operator's voice was calm, professional, almost too calm for the gravity of the situation. But what she didn't know, what no one could know at that moment, was that this wasn't some random act of violence. This wasn't a crime of passion. No, this was far more calculated. A man who knew exactly what he was doing. A man who had planned this moment. And yet, he called 911 immediately after executing his plan. He hesitated. The sound of a door opening and closing echoed in the background. The soft scuff of shoes on a hardwood floor. "I'm not sure how to say this. I just killed him. The man who came to my house. I had no choice." The operator waited, her fingers poised above the keyboard. "Sir, I need you to remain calm. Can you tell me where you are?" "I'm at 418 Rosewood Avenue," he said, his voice shaking now, the panic settling in. I'm waiting for you, please. Please hurry." A chill crept down the operator's spine. She'd heard her fair share of frantic callers, but this one felt different. There was something in his voice that didn't seem like a person caught in the heat of the moment. It felt rehearsed. "Sir," she continued, trying to steady her own nerves, "who did you kill?" His breath hitched. "My boss," he answered, almost too casually. "His name is Victor Novak." The name hit the operator like a gut punch. Victor Novak, Ridgewood's most prominent businessman. A man whose name was tied to almost every major deal, every major contract in the area. If anyone was untouchable in this town, it was Novak. He was a towering figure, a titan of industry, with connections reaching far beyond the confines of Ridgewood. And now, someone had murdered him. But there was no hesitation in the caller's voice, no remorse. It was as if he was simply stating the facts, as if he were reporting a mundane incident, like the weather or a traffic jam. "Why?" the operator pressed, sensing the confusion in the air. "Why did you do this? Did he threaten you?" There was a long pause. The man's breathing slowed, and then, with a surprising level of clarity, he spoke again. "I didn't want to, but I had no choice. You have to understand, I didn't have any other way out. He knew everything about me." The operator's mind raced. She tried to steady her thoughts. "What do you mean? What did he know? I worked for him for years. He's been using me, using my skills. He wanted me to do things I couldn't live with, things that were too dangerous. But I didn't have a choice. If I refused, I'd be dead." His words were haunting, every syllable dripping with a sense of dread. The operator was no longer just trying to get the basic details. She needed more. She had to understand the situation completely before the police arrived. "You don't understand," he continued, his voice trembling, the weight of what he was confessing sinking deeper. "I was just a pawn in his game. He controlled everything in my life, my work, my future, everything. He was going to ruin me. I had to stop him before he did it to someone else." "Is there anyone else involved?" the operator asked, her voice growing more urgent. "Is there anyone still in danger?" "I don't know," the man said, his words barely a whisper. "I thought it was over, but then I saw something I wasn't supposed to, and I realized I wasn't the only one he was using." There was another pause. This time, the silence was thick, suffocating. Then he spoke again, his voice barely audible, laced with fear. He had a plan, a big one, and now it's too late. No one is safe. At that moment, the sound of sirens in the distance could be heard, growing louder. The operator knew the police were on their way, but she felt an overwhelming sense of unease. This wasn't just a random act of violence. There was something much bigger at play, something that was only just beginning to unravel. "Sir," the operator said, her voice steadying as she saw the flashing lights through the window. "The authorities are almost there. Please stay on the line with me." But the man's response shocked her. "I'm not the one you need to worry about," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "He's dead, but his plan isn't. It's still out there." Before the operator could respond, the call abruptly ended. The line went dead. The cold wind cut through the narrow streets of Ridgewood as the police arrived at 418 Rosewood Avenue. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the quiet neighborhood in a harsh glow. It was just past midnight when the officers, armed with their standard-issue flashlights and weapons, approached the door of the modest home. There was no sound, no movement from inside, only the faint echo of sirens in the distance as the officers approached with caution. Detective Sarah Walker was the first to enter the house. Her steady gaze scanned the surroundings, taking in the stale air of a house frozen in time. The hallway was dimly lit by the soft glow of a flickering light, and the faint scent of metal, like blood, lingered in the air. "Clear," she muttered to her partner, Officer Ryan Hayes, who followed her inside. The interior of the house was modest, nothing extravagant, but it was the quietness of it all that unsettled Walker. A small lamp cast shadows over a dusty couch, and a half-empty cup of coffee sat on the kitchen counter, as though someone had left in a rush. There was an eerie stillness, as though the house was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. They moved carefully through the small rooms, searching for any signs of life. But it was in the small office at the back of the house that they found it. Victor Novak's body lay on the floor, his once pristine suit now stained with blood. His face was frozen in a grimace, eyes wide open, and his mouth twisted in shock. A single bullet had been fired at close range, entering through the back of his skull. There was no sign of struggle, no defensive wounds. He had been taken by surprise, caught off guard by someone he trusted. "Jesus," Ryan whispered under his breath. "It looks like he never saw it coming." Detective Walker crouched down beside the body, her sharp eyes examining the scene. She glanced over at the desk, noticing the disarray, papers scattered across the wooden surface, some torn, others crumpled in haste. A name stood out on one of the papers, Novak Enterprises. It read, along with a series of figures and charts that seemed to be tied to some sort of financial deal. But the details were too unclear for Walker to piece together in that moment. "Something isn't right," Walker muttered, more to herself than to her partner. She pulled out her phone, calling in for backup, then snapped a photo of the papers. The call to 911 had seemed straightforward enough. An open confession, a man admitting to his crime. But the more they dug, the more Walker began to suspect that this was not a simple case of murder. She had seen enough crime scenes to know when something felt off, and this one had layers, deep ones. Back at the station, the 911 call played on repeat. The confession was chilling, but there was something about the man's voice that still unsettled the team. It wasn't the sound of someone overwhelmed with guilt or fear. It was the sound of someone who had prepared for this moment, someone who had no intention of fleeing from the consequences. The 911 operator, Sarah Hayes, had spoken with the man on the phone. She listened intently to his words, her brow furrowed in confusion. He had said he killed Victor Novak, but why call the police? Why not flee, go into hiding, or disappear? There was a certain level of honesty in his confession, but also a level of manipulation. It didn't add up. "We need to find out who this guy is," Walker said, pulling up a chair in front of a computer screen. She scrolled through the 911 call log, looking for any clues that could lead them to their suspect. His name was Michael Jameson, a quiet man in his mid-30s, a local resident who had worked as Novak's assistant for years. She leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they still didn't form a clear picture. "I'm going to need you to dig into Jameson's background," Walker told her team. "There's more to this than a simple murder." As they continued their investigation, they began to uncover details that no one had expected. Jameson had worked for Novak for nearly a decade. He was a loyal employee, always in the background, always staying out of the limelight. But beneath that facade, there were signs of a growing resentment, a simmering frustration that Novak had been feeding for years. Meanwhile, Michael Jameson sat alone in an interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent light overhead casting shadows across his face. His hands were cuffed in front of him, his eyes darting nervously toward the door, as though expecting someone to walk in and offer him a way out. But he knew there was no escape. Not now. Not after what he had done. Detective Walker stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She didn't sit across from him. Instead, she stood, leaning against the wall, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't run," she said, her voice low and steady. "Why didn't you just leave, Michael? You could have disappeared. Nobody would have known." Jameson's eyes flickered, his lips twitching in a faint, nervous smile. "It wasn't about running," he replied, his voice steady but tinged with something darker. "I needed to make sure the truth came out. Novak he was a monster." Walker narrowed her eyes. "I don't believe you. Not yet. You're hiding something." His face hardened, a flicker of anger crossing his features. "You have no idea what he was really like. What he did to me. To others." He leaned forward, the anger rising in his voice. "You have no idea how deep this goes." "Then tell me," Walker said, her tone sharp. "Tell me what I need to know." For a moment, Jameson didn't speak. He just stared at her, his gaze intense, almost desperate. Finally, he spoke. "Novak was involved in things that no one should ever be involved in. There's a reason I killed him. A reason no one will ever understand." Walker stepped forward, her curiosity piqued. "And what's that reason, Michael?" He shook his head, his lips curling into a half-smile. "I can't tell you yet. Not until you see it for yourself. But I can tell you this. The people who are after me now, they won't stop until they've buried everything. And they'll come after you too." The words hung in the air like a warning, a threat, or a promise. Walker couldn't tell which. Later that night, as Walker stood outside the precinct, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. It was a text message from an anonymous number. The message was short, cryptic, and to the point. "You're digging in the wrong place. Get out while you can." She swallowed hard, her heart racing. She knew that message meant something. And she knew it wasn't just Jameson who had something to hide. Whoever was behind all of this, whoever Jameson had worked for, was much more dangerous than she had anticipated. As Walker pondered the next steps, a chilling realization gripped her. The deeper she went into this case, the more tangled the web became. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized that someone was watching her every move. Someone who had been waiting for her to get too close. There were still too many unanswered questions. What was Novak really involved in? Who was Jameson protecting? And what did the message really mean? As she turned to leave the precinct, she noticed something on the sidewalk. A small, folded piece of paper. She picked it up, unfolding it slowly. The writing was hurried, the ink smudged. It read, "Victor Novak isn't dead. Not yet." The words sent a cold shiver down Walker's spine. Detective Sarah Walker stood frozen, the crumpled note in her hand trembling slightly. "Victor Novak isn't dead. Not yet." The words burned in her mind, gnawing at the edge of her thoughts, twisting her insides into a knot of confusion and dread. The note had come out of nowhere, a warning that Victor Novak might still be alive after all. She felt a chill run through her as she stood on the sidewalk outside the precinct. The city lights flickered above her, but all she could see was the note, its smudged ink almost mocking her. A man had confessed to his murder. He had called 911, reported it himself, and sat in an interrogation room waiting for the consequences. But now this, the idea that Novak might not be dead at all seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting that everything they thought they knew about the case was wrong. "Walker!" Ryan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stepped out of the precinct, his face serious as he walked toward her. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." She held up the note without speaking, her jaw clenched. He took it, his brows furrowing as he read it. "Victor Novak's not dead." Ryan echoed, glancing at her for confirmation. "But we saw the body, Sarah. There was no question. It was him." "That's what I thought," she said, shaking her head. "But something's not adding up. The deeper we go, the more tangled this whole thing gets." Ryan stared at the note for a moment longer, before crumpling it into a tight ball and tossing it into a nearby trash bin. So what's the next move? We go back to square one, Walker said, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of urgency. I need to dig into Jameson's past, find out who he's really working for. He knows more than he's telling us, and whoever's behind this is dangerous. Hours later, they sat in a dimly lit conference room at the precinct, poring over files, trying to piece together the puzzle that had been handed to them. Walker was scanning through Jameson's background, his history as Novak's assistant, his personal life, the small details, but something kept nagging at her. Novak's business empire wasn't just vast, it was built on shady dealings, backdoor agreements, and connections that ran deep. She couldn't shake the feeling that Jameson wasn't just a pawn in Novak's game. He was connected to something bigger, something darker. Ryan was flipping through a file on his end when he stopped. "Wait a second," he said, looking up. "I found something." Walker leaned forward. "What is it?" Jameson was more than just an assistant. He was also working on a side project, something tied to Novak Enterprises, but not officially on the books, Ryan explained, tapping the file. "It's marked confidential, but it's some sort of business venture. A large-scale international deal that Novak was pushing through under the radar. We're talking billions. Why keep a secret?" Walker asked. Novak was known for being transparent, for controlling everything. If it was so important, why hide it? "That's the thing. It wasn't Novak's deal," Ryan said. "It looks like it was Jameson's, and it was in its final stages before Novak was killed. The deal was about to go public." "Are you saying Jameson killed Novak to take over the deal?" Walker asked, feeling the pieces begin to shift in her mind. "I don't know," Ryan said, his voice uncertain, "but it's starting to look like it." Walker leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. If Jameson had killed Novak, it wasn't just about self-preservation. It was about seizing control of something far bigger than a simple business empire. The stakes were much higher than she'd imagined. Back at the house on Rosewood Avenue, Walker and Ryan stood in the entryway, now with backup and a forensics team. The scene inside had barely been touched since the murder. There were still no signs of forced entry, and everything seemed to have been left in place, almost as if the killer had known exactly where to go and what to do. "We need to get into Novak's office," Walker said. "I want to see what he was working on in those final hours." The forensics team had already scoured the office, but there was still something missing. They hadn't found any information directly linking Novak to Jameson's alleged side deal. But Walker's gut told her there was more to uncover. As she stepped into Novak's home office, she felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. The room was immaculate, every item in its place, but something about it felt off. The books on the shelves, the scattered papers on the desk, everything was so deliberately organized, like it had been designed to make an impression. "Walker," Ryan called from the other side of the room. "You might want to take a look at this." Walker walked over to Ryan, who was standing in front of a large, ornate cabinet. He opened one of the drawers, revealing a series of folders marked with numbers, not names. There were no labels, no indication of what the files contained, but they were clearly important. She flipped through them quickly, her heart pounding as she skimmed the contents. There were encrypted contracts, coded language, and foreign accounts. This wasn't just corporate paperwork. This was something far more secretive, something Novak had kept buried. "What is this?" she muttered, looking at Ryan in disbelief. "It's bigger than we thought," he replied. "These accounts, they aren't tied to Novak Enterprises. They're tied to international investors. And these numbers, they correspond to offshore bank accounts." Walker's mind raced as she processed the information. The depth of the conspiracy was unfolding before her eyes. Novak had been involved in something far more dangerous than any of them had anticipated. And now, someone was covering their tracks, someone who was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. Back at the precinct, Walker sat in her office, staring at the files before her. The silence of the room felt suffocating as she tried to put the pieces together. But everything was starting to unravel faster than she could control. The phone on her desk rang, breaking the quiet. "Detective Walker?" The voice on the other end was muffled, urgent. You need to get to the hospital. Now, there's been an incident. Her stomach dropped. What happened? There's a man here. Michael Jameson. He's been shot. Twice. It didn't take long for Walker and Ryan to arrive at the hospital. They were led down a long corridor toward a private room where Michael Jameson was being treated for gunshot wounds. He was unconscious, pale, and bloody, but alive. The sight of him stirred something in Walker. How had he gone from confessing to a murder to being shot himself? Was this part of the plan? Or had someone else gotten to him first? Who did this? Walker demanded as she entered the room. The nurse looked up, shaking her head. We don't know yet. We're still waiting for confirmation. He was dropped off at the entrance. No name, no information. Just him. Walker's heart raced as she looked down at Jameson's battered body. He was still alive, but barely, and someone had gone through great lengths to keep him quiet. Then a sudden, chilling thought hit her. If Jameson wasn't the one behind Novak's murder, then who was? As she stood there, staring at Jameson's fragile form, a loud crash echoed down the hallway. Something had gone wrong. Something was happening, and it was happening fast. Detective! Ryan shouted, rushing to her side. We've got another problem. The files, they're gone. Someone broke in. The sharp sound of the glass breaking echoed down the sterile hospital corridor, cutting through the panic that had already begun to set in. Detective Sarah Walker and her partner Ryan Hayes bolted toward the source of the noise, their hearts pounding. They had barely processed the magnitude of Michael Jameson's near-death experience when the real threat arrived. Someone was trying to erase the last pieces of the puzzle, and they were willing to do anything to make it disappear. As they rounded the corner, a shadow darted into an abandoned stairwell. The sound of footsteps echoed loudly, but the figure was too quick, vanishing down the stairs before they could reach the top. Damn it! Ryan cursed under his breath. Walker hesitated for a split second, her instinct screaming that they needed to act fast. We need backup. Now, she called into her radio, but before she could finish the sentence, another crash sounded from below. It was followed by the sharp squeal of an emergency exit door slamming open. Move, Walker shouted, taking the stairs two at a time, her hand gripping the rail with urgency. The adrenaline was rushing through her veins, and her mind raced with 1,000 questions. Who was this person? Why were they targeting Jameson? And more importantly, what were they hiding? They reached the ground floor, bursting into the hallway. The lights above flickered as they sprinted toward the emergency exit. Walker could hear a faint noise outside, cars screeching, tires skidding. Someone was making a run for it. Cover me, Ryan said, pulling his weapon as they neared the door. Walker nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. There was no way someone would break into a secure hospital ward unless they knew something important. The question that gnawed at her wasn't about who the attacker was. It was what was in those files. The ones Jameson had given them before the shooting. She had seen enough to know that they weren't just about business. They were about something much darker. They pushed open the door to the outside. A gust of cold air hit them as they scanned the area. The parking lot was nearly empty, the streets slick with rain, and the streetlights casting long shadows. It was the perfect setting for someone to disappear without a trace. Where are they? Ryan muttered, sweeping his gun over the lot. But then, the faintest movement caught Walker's eye. Just beyond the dimly lit corner, a figure emerged from the shadows, darting behind a parked car. It was too quick to be a coincidence. Get down, Walker hissed, grabbing Ryan's arm and pulling him to the ground. They crouched behind a row of bushes, watching the figure carefully. The figure seemed to be moving with purpose, carrying something bulky, wrapped in black plastic. It looked like a bag, but what was inside? The darkness made it difficult to discern, but Walker's gut told her that it wasn't something innocent. Whoever had broken into the hospital wasn't just running away. They were carrying something that could unravel everything they had worked for. Ryan adjusted his position, readying himself to move. We need to get closer. We can't let them get away. Walker nodded, her hand on her gun as they moved stealthily through the shadows. Every step felt like an eternity, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the rain-soaked ground. As they drew closer, the figure turned, revealing a face partially obscured by a hood. Suddenly, The man dropped the bag, his head jerking up in alarm. In that split second, Walker recognized him. It was not a stranger. It was someone from Ridgewood, someone with a connection to Novak Enterprises. It was Alan Foster, Novak's right-hand man. Foster! Walker hissed under her breath, her heart pounding. The man had been the silent force behind much of Novak's business dealings. No one knew much about him, but his name had surfaced a few times in her research into Novak's empire. Foster was known for staying in the shadows, working his way through the underworld of Ridgewood's business scene. Without wasting another moment, Walker stood up, pointing her gun toward Foster. "Stop! FBI! Don't move!" Foster froze. His eyes widened in disbelief, as if he couldn't believe they had found him. "Drop the bag. Now!" Walker ordered, her voice steady. Foster's expression shifted, a fleeting look of calculation crossing his features. For a moment, Walker saw the man's internal struggle, whether to comply or to fight. Then, something in his eyes darkened, and without a word, he spun on his heel, sprinting toward the edge of the parking lot. After him, Ryan shouted, but before they could react, a deafening crack rang out. Foster dropped to the ground. Shots fired. Ryan shouted, diving for cover. Walker's pulse raced as she glanced toward the direction of the shot. From the far side of the lot, a black SUV was slowly driving toward them. The window rolled down, and before she could make sense of the situation, another shot rang out, narrowly missing her. She ducked behind a concrete barrier, heart pounding in her chest. "We need to get out of here. Now!" Ryan yelled, pulling her arm to drag her into cover. "Get back to the precinct. We've got to figure out who's behind this." Walker barely had time to respond before a voice crackled in her earpiece. "Walker, Ryan, come in. We've got a situation. It's Jameson. He's missing." The car ride back to the precinct was a blur of lights, sirens, and muffled radio chatter. The shot that took down Alan Foster had raised the stakes. But even more pressing was the news that Michael Jameson had disappeared from the hospital, mere hours after they had left him barely alive in his bed. How had he managed to escape under their noses? Was he in on the conspiracy after all? Or had someone whisked him away to keep him from talking? By the time they arrived at the station, Walker was no longer certain who the real enemy was. The line between ally and foe had blurred to the point of no return. It wasn't just Novak's murder or the shady deals. It was something much deeper. They were up against a well-oiled machine, a force with connections so vast that it was hard to know where to start. "Walker." Ryan's voice pulled her from her thoughts as she stepped into the precinct. He was standing near the phone, a look of disbelief on his face. "You need to see this." Walker approached, her heart sinking as Ryan handed her a file. The first page was a photograph of Michael Jameson, alive and well, but it wasn't taken recently. It was from a high-profile meeting months ago, and the most disturbing part was the man standing beside him. Victor Novak. "Impossible," Walker whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "He's alive." "Walker, I think we've been looking in the wrong direction," Ryan said, his voice low. "We've been chasing shadows, but the truth is right in front of us. Novak isn't dead. He's been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes." The shock hit her like a freight train. For months, they had been chasing leads, following the trail left by Novak's so-called death. But now, the reality was far worse than they had imagined. Novak was still alive, and he had been pulling the strings all along. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. There was only one thing left to do. They needed to find Novak before he disappeared for good, and before his empire of corruption could swallow Ridgewood whole. But as Walker turned to leave the precinct, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. A voice echoed in her mind, the same warning she had heard earlier. Victor Novak isn't dead. Not yet. As she stepped into the rain-soaked streets, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "You're getting closer, but it's too late. He's already moved." The rain poured down relentlessly as Detective Sarah Walker stood outside the precinct, the weight of the case pressing heavily on her shoulders. The city of Ridgewood had always been a quiet, almost idyllic town, but everything had changed in the last few weeks. What started as a simple confession, one man admitting to killing a figurehead of the community, had spiraled into a labyrinth of lies, deceit, and a conspiracy so vast that it threatened to bring down the town itself. Now, the realization had hit her with a brutal finality. Victor Novak wasn't dead. He had been playing everyone from the start, manipulating those around him, and pulling the strings of his empire from the shadows. The man who was thought to be dead was still alive, still running his web of corruption, and still in control. But she and her team were closing in on him. Walker tightened her grip on her jacket as she stepped toward her car, her mind racing. The pieces were falling into place, and every second that passed brought her closer to Novak's capture. But even as she tried to focus, doubt lingered. Was this the end? Or had they all been dancing to Novak's tune? Unaware of how much deeper the rabbit hole went, her phone buzzed again. It was a new message, one she had been waiting for. The subject line read, "Novak's final move, his safe house location." "Where is he?" Walker muttered, quickly tapping the screen. A series of coordinates appeared on her phone, followed by a brief message. "Hiding in plain sight. We know where he is. Get him now." Without hesitation, she slammed her car door shut and started the engine. As she navigated through the wet streets, the coordinates burned into her mind. Novak's location wasn't far from the center of Ridgewood, hidden behind layers of security, but not unreachable. It was a luxury penthouse, a place that only someone of Novak's status could afford. He was untouchable, or so he thought. Walker wasn't about to let that illusion last any longer. 20 minutes later, Walker, Ryan, and a small team of officers stood at the base of a sleek, modern building. The penthouse loomed high above them, a fortress surrounded by high-tech security systems and private guards. The rain had stopped, but the chill in the air only seemed to deepen the urgency of the moment. Every step they took was a step closer to ending the reign of terror Novak had held over the town. "Here's the plan," Walker said, her voice low but commanding. "We'll breach the building quietly. Get Novak in custody. Ryan, you and I will take the front. The rest of you, secure the exits. We can't let him slip away again." Ryan nodded, his expression determined. "We'll get him, Sarah. It's over for him." Walker didn't reply immediately. Her mind kept returning to Jameson, the man who had once been Novak's assistant, but had ultimately exposed the truth. Jameson had been the key to unlocking this entire case. And despite everything, Walker couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to the story. He was somewhere out there, maybe in hiding, maybe working with someone else, but she hadn't forgotten him. "Let's move," she ordered. The building's elevator was sleek, its polished walls reflecting their tense expressions. As the elevator ascended, Walker's thoughts remained sharp and focused. The countdown in her mind was ticking down. Each floor they passed bringing them closer to the confrontation that would decide everything. Finally, the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, revealing the hallway to Novak's penthouse. Two guards stood at the entrance, their postures rigid, clearly trained to protect whoever was inside. Walker gestured for her team to split up and quietly flank the guards. The confrontation was swift. Before the guards had time to react, they were overpowered and restrained. Novak's men were loyal, yes, but no match for the trained officers who had been hunting Novak for weeks. With the guards neutralized, Walker and Ryan approached the heavy wooden doors of the penthouse. The lights from inside flickered through the cracks, casting a menacing glow in the hallway. "This is it," Walker whispered, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. She turned the knob, and the door creaked open. The sight that greeted them inside was one of stark opulence. The penthouse was decorated with lavish furniture, expensive artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. But none of it mattered. The room was empty, save for a man standing near the far wall, a man who had been playing everyone for far too long. Victor Novak. He was standing with his back to them, his posture relaxed, but his expression one of cold calculation. He didn't turn around immediately, as if he knew they were there, as if he was waiting for something. "You're too late," Novak finally said, his voice calm, almost bored. He slowly turned around to face them, his eyes cold and calculating. "I've already won." Walker felt a sudden rush of anger surge through her, but she controlled it. This man had destroyed so many lives, manipulated so many people. She wasn't about to let him get away with it. "You're under arrest for the murders of Victor Novak and Alan Foster," she said, her voice firm and commanding. "You're going to pay for what you've done." For a moment, Novak simply stared at her, his lips curling into a smile that was anything but reassuring. "I don't think you understand, Detective," he said. "You think you've won. You think you've stopped me. But the truth is, everything you've uncovered, the murders, the lies, the conspiracy, it was all a distraction. I've already made my exit. You're too late to stop the real plan." Walker's heart skipped a beat. What plan? A low, almost sinister laugh escaped Novak's lips as he stepped toward the far side of the room, where a large, sleek briefcase rested on a polished desk. "You don't get it, do you? All of this, the murder of Jameson, the fake death, the people I manipulated, was nothing more than a way to keep your attention diverted. But the truth is, I've already secured my future. Everything I've built, everything I've planned, it's all in place. And now I'll be untouchable." His fingers hovered over the briefcase, as if making a final decision. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he opened it. Inside were stacks of money, passports, and a laptop. A secure laptop that was clearly connected to something much bigger. Walker's blood ran cold. Novak wasn't just running away. He was setting up his escape for good. "Where are you going?" she demanded, taking a step toward him. "You can't run forever." "Actually, I can," Novak replied, his eyes narrowing as he slowly backed toward the open window, where a helicopter hovered just outside, ready to whisk him away. "And as for your little investigation, well, you'll find that some truths are better left buried." Before Walker could make another move, Novak turned, swiftly grabbing the laptop from the briefcase and heading straight for the window. The helicopter was closer now, its engines roaring as the door slid open. It was only a matter of seconds before he was out of reach. "Stop!" Walker shouted, lunging forward, but Novak was already gone. The helicopter's door slammed shut, and within seconds, the chopper was rising into the air, taking him out of her grasp. Walker stood motionless, watching as the helicopter soared higher, taking Victor Novak with it. She was so close to ending everything. But now, she had a new realization. Novak had left behind more than just a physical escape. The laptop, the money, the connections. There was something deeper at play, and she had no idea what it was. "Sarah, we have to go," Ryan shouted, pulling her from her thoughts. Walker snapped out of her trance, her mind racing. "This isn't over. Not yet." As the helicopter disappeared into the night sky, a cold realization washed over her. She hadn't just lost Novak. She had lost the one thing that could have destroyed him. The laptop, the helicopter that carried Victor Novak into the night sky, was nothing more than a distant blur in the dark, its roar fading as it disappeared into the storm clouds. But as Detective Sarah Walker stood at the penthouse window, staring into the abyss, the weight of what had just happened crushed down on her. She had been so close to bringing him to justice. But Novak was gone. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the steady hum of the city outside, the rain pattering against the window. Walker's thoughts raced, trying to piece together what Novak had left behind. There had to be something that would lead them to him, something that would stop him from slipping away for good. "We need to move," Ryan said, his voice cutting through the silence. He was standing behind her, his face grim. "We can't let him get away." She turned slowly to face him, her eyes hardening with resolve. "He's not gone. Not yet." Walker knew she couldn't afford to waste any more time. She rushed toward the desk, where Novak's briefcase lay open. Inside, the stacks of money were useless to her now. The real prize was the laptop Novak had been so careful to keep hidden, the one he had clutched as he made his escape. She opened the briefcase and grabbed the laptop, the cold weight of it a bitter reminder that the fight was far from over. "What do you think he was trying to hide?" Ryan asked, eyeing the laptop warily. "We need to get it back to the lab, figure out what's on it." "I don't think we have time for that," Walker said, already moving toward the door. "We're going to decrypt it ourselves." Novak wasn't just running from us. He was running from something much bigger. I'm betting the laptop holds everything we need to finally bring him down. Back at the precinct, The team worked tirelessly to break into Novak's encrypted laptop. The clock was ticking, and Walker felt the pressure building in her chest. She knew that Novak had connections, people who would go to any lengths to protect him. But she also knew that if they could get into the laptop, they would find the key to ending Novak's reign of terror once and for all. An hour passed in tense silence as they watched the laptop screen flicker to life. A series of complex passwords and firewalls stood between them and the information they needed. But with each attempt, they grew closer. Then, with a final click, the screen flickered and a flood of documents appeared. "Got it," Walker muttered under her breath. She leaned in closer, scanning the files. There were financial records, personal accounts, coded messages, everything Novak had used to hide his empire of corruption. But what caught her eye was a series of names that she recognized from her investigation into Jameson's past. These were no ordinary business deals. These were dangerous international connections, laundering money for legal arms deals, drug trafficking, and human rights violations. The scale of Novak's operation was far larger than she had ever imagined. "This is it," Ryan said, his voice hushed. "This is the proof we needed. He's not just a corrupt businessman. He's been running an underground network for years." Walker's heart pounded as she read through the documents, realizing the full extent of Novak's criminal empire. This wasn't just about power or money. This was about control, an iron grip on Ridgewood, the state, and far beyond. If Novak's plans had gone unchecked, he could have continued this operation indefinitely. The files detailed everything: the accounts, the deals, the people involved. But one name stood out above the rest: Michael Jameson, the very man who had called 911, who had confessed to killing Victor Novak. According to these records, Jameson had been more than just a pawn. He had been Novak's secret accomplice in many of these deals, a man who had once been a trusted confidant and now stood at the heart of the operation. "No way," Walker whispered. "Jameson, he wasn't just trying to stop Novak. He was trying to take control." As the pieces clicked together, it became clear that Jameson had not killed Novak to escape the operation. He had been trying to take Novak's place, to secure the empire for himself. But something had gone wrong. Jameson had exposed himself, and now he was on the run, likely being hunted by those who had once worked with him. The next few hours were a blur of activity as Walker and her team began to trace Novak's connections, reaching out to authorities across the globe. Interpol was contacted, the FBI was notified, and within minutes, a coordinated effort to track Novak's escape route began. They had him cornered, but just as they were about to make their move, Walker received an unexpected phone call. It was from Jameson. "Detective." Jameson's voice was calm, but there was a distinct edge of fear in it. "You don't know everything. Where are you?" Walker demanded, her voice tight with anger and exhaustion. "You're going to pay for this, Jameson." "I never wanted this," Jameson said quickly, his words tumbling out. "I thought I was helping Novak, but it's too much. You have no idea what you're dealing with. He's not just some businessman. He's a monster, and there are people who will kill to protect him." "Where are you?" Walker repeated, her patience running thin. "This ends now." Jameson hesitated, then sighed heavily. "There's still time. You can stop all of it. He's planning to flee, but there's a way to stop him. If you don't act now, he'll disappear for good. There's a location, an island off the coast of Greece. That's where he's headed. You need to get there before he does." The line went dead before Walker could respond. She turned to Ryan, her mind already processing the information. "The island. That's where he's going to disappear forever," she said, already grabbing her jacket. "We need to move fast." The flight to Greece was long, but there was no time to waste. As the plane touched down on the small, isolated island, Walker's heart raced. This was it. If Novak was still here, they would end it once and for all. The island was deserted, save for a few villas and private properties. As they made their way to the address Jameson had given them, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the narrow path leading to a mansion at the edge of the cliffs. The sea crashed violently against the rocks below, as if nature itself was warning them of the storm they were about to walk into. As they reached the mansion, the door creaked open, revealing an empty foyer. But something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of Walker's neck stood on end as she motioned for the team to stay alert. They crept through the house, moving cautiously from room to room, and then they found it. In the back room, hidden beneath a trapdoor in the floor, a hidden safe was revealed. Inside was a laptop, documents, and several passports, each one bearing different identities. This was Novak's escape plan. But as Walker opened the laptop, a message flashed on the screen. "You're too late, detective. The game is over." It was Novak's final taunt. But then, as she scrolled through the files, something new appeared, a location, coordinates. Justice was served, but Novak wasn't finished yet. His final move was to force Walker into a chase that could end everything.